Let me share something with you that I've learned over the years. When I was a young man working on my mentor's farm, I used to watch him plant seeds every spring. Now, here's what fascinated me. He never planted just once and expected a harvest. He understood something that most people miss about success in life. He knew that between the planting and the harvest, there's a season called persistence. You see, most people plant their dreams once, maybe twice, and when they don't see immediate results, they quit. They move on to something else. But the truly successful people in history, the ones who changed the world, they understood a simple truth. Persistence isn't just helpful for achieving your goals, it's absolutely essential. Let me tell you about a man who knew this better than most. His name was Thomas Edison, and by the time he died, he held over 1,000 patents. But here's what most people don't know about Edison. He failed more than he succeeded, at least in the beginning. When Edison was working on the light bulb, he didn't get it right on the first try, or the second, or even the 100th. Legend says he tried over 1,000 different materials for the filament before he found one that worked. When a reporter asked him how it felt to fail so many times, Edison said something remarkable. "I haven't failed. I've just found 1,000 ways that don't work." That's the mindset of persistence, my friend. Edison understood that every so-called failure was actually feedback. Every attempt that didn't work was simply information that brought him closer to the solution that would. Now I want you to think about your own life for a moment. What dreams have you planted? What goals have you set? And more importantly, how many times have you watered them with consistent action? You see, here's what I've discovered. Most people are great starters but poor finishers. They get excited about a new idea, a new business venture, a new relationship, a new fitness program. They start with enthusiasm, but when the initial excitement wears off and the real work begins, they fade away. But persistence, real persistence, begins where excitement ends. Let me tell you about another man who understood this principle. His name was Abraham Lincoln, and he became one of America's greatest presidents. But his path to the White House was paved with what most people would call failures. Lincoln lost his job in 1832. He was defeated in the legislature that same year. His business failed in 1833, leaving him in debt for 17 years. The woman he loved died in 1835. He had a nervous breakdown in 1836. He was defeated for Speaker in 1838, defeated for Elector in 1840, defeated for Congress in 1843, defeated again for Congress in 1848, defeated for Senate in 1855, and defeated for Vice President in 1856. By most people's standards, Lincoln was a failure, but here's what made him different. He kept going. He understood that temporary defeat is not permanent failure. In 1860, this so-called failure became President of the United States and went on to preserve the Union and free the slaves. What if Lincoln had quit after his first defeat? What if he had said, "Well, I guess politics isn't for me," and gone back to splitting rails? The course of American history would have been forever changed. That's the power of persistence. It doesn't just change your life, it can change the world. Now I know what some of you might be thinking. Jim, that's all well and good, but some people are just naturally more persistent than others. Some people are born with more willpower. Let me tell you something, that's not true. Persistence isn't something you're born with or without. It's something you develop, like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. I learned this lesson early in my business career. When I first started in sales, I was terrible. Really terrible. I couldn't sell water in the desert. My first month, I made $37. $37, I was so discouraged, I wanted to quit. But my mentor told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Jim, the difference between successful people and unsuccessful people isn't that successful people don't face obstacles. It's that they've learned to persist through obstacles." He was right. I kept going, kept learning, kept improving. And eventually I became one of the top salespeople in the company. But it wasn't because I was naturally gifted. It was because I learned to persist when things got tough. Here's what I want you to understand. Persistence is a choice you make every single day. Not one big decision. It's 1,000 small decisions. It's the decision to get up when you feel like staying in bed. It's the decision to make one more phone call when you've already been rejected 10 times. It's the decision to keep learning when you feel like you already know enough. Persistence is the bridge between where you are and where you want to be. Let me tell you about a man who built that bridge one day at a time. His name was Colonel Sanders. Yes, that Colonel Sanders from Kentucky Fried Chicken. But here's what most people don't know about his story. Colonel Sanders didn't start KFC until he was 65 years old. 65. Most people that age are thinking about retirement. But Sanders was just getting started. And it wasn't because everything had been easy for him up to that point. Sanders had tried dozens of different jobs throughout his life. He was a farmhand, a streetcar conductor, a soldier, a railroad fireman, a lawyer, an insurance salesman, a steamboat operator, and a gas station owner. He failed at most of them. When he finally perfected his secret recipe for fried chicken, he thought his troubles were over. He was wrong. He tried to sell his recipe to restaurants, but they kept turning him down. Do you know how many times he was rejected? Over 1,000 times. Think about that for a moment. Over 1,000 rejections. Most people would have quit after 10 rejections. Maybe 20 if they were really determined. But Sanders kept going. He slept in his car, lived on a shoestring budget, and kept knocking on doors. Finally, after more than 1,000 rejections, someone said yes. Today, KFC has over 20,000 locations worldwide, all because one man refused to quit. Now here's what I find fascinating about Sanders' story. He didn't succeed because he was the smartest person in the room, or because he had the most money, or the best connections. He succeeded because he understood something that most people never learn. Temporary failure is the price you pay for permanent success. Every successful person I've ever met has paid that price. They've all faced moments when quitting seemed like the logical choice, but they kept going anyway. Let me share with you what I call the 3 levels of persistence, because understanding these levels can help you push through when times get tough. The first level is surface persistence. This is where most people operate. They try something, hit the first obstacle, and if they persist at all, it's only for a short time. They might make a few more attempts, but their heart isn't really in it. They're hoping for a miracle rather than working for a breakthrough. The second level is emotional persistence. Is where you persist because you're emotionally invested in the outcome. Maybe it's a business you've poured your heart into, or a relationship that means everything to you. You keep going because you care deeply about the result. This level will take you much further than surface persistence, but it has its limits. When emotions fade or change, so does the persistence. The third level is philosophical persistence. This is the highest level, and it's where all great achievers operate. At this level, you persist not just because you want the outcome, but because you understand that persistence itself is shaping you into the person you need to become to deserve that outcome. You see, goals are not just about what you get. They're about what you become in the process of achieving them. Every time you persist through difficulty, you're building character. Every time you keep going when you feel like quitting, you're developing strength. Every time you stay committed to your vision, when others doubt you, you're cultivating unshakable faith in yourself. This is what I learned from studying great leaders throughout history. They didn't persist just to achieve their goals. They persisted because they understood that the person they became through persistence was more valuable than any external achievement. Take Winston Churchill, for example. Before he became the man who saved Britain during World War II, he faced decades of political setbacks, was considered a failure by many of his peers. He lost elections, made unpopular decisions, and was often ignored or ridiculed. But Churchill had developed philosophical persistence. He understood that every setback was preparing him for something greater. When Britain needed him most, when the nation faced its darkest hour, Churchill was ready, not because he had never failed, but because he had learned to persist through failure. Here's what Churchill understood that most people miss. The real victory isn't in avoiding obstacles. It's in developing the strength to overcome them. He once said, "Success is going from failure to failure, without losing your enthusiasm." That's philosophical persistence in action. Now let me tell you about one of the greatest examples of persistence in modern history. A man who changed the world not through force or wealth, but through the sheer power of never giving up. His name was Mahatma Gandhi. When Gandhi first returned to India from South Africa, he was nobody special. He was a shy lawyer who had struggled to find his voice. The Indian independence movement was led by others, more prominent figures who had been fighting British rule for decades. But Gandhi had something different. He had developed a philosophy of persistence. that was unlike anything the world had seen before. He called it satyagraha, holding firmly to truth, and he was willing to persist in his truth no matter what the cost. When Gandhi began his campaigns of non-violent resistance, most people thought he was crazy. How could one man, armed with nothing but principles, take on the mighty British Empire? The British certainly didn't take him seriously at first. They saw him as a nuisance, not a threat. But Gandhi understood something about persistence that his opponents didn't. He knew that water, over time, can wear away the hardest stone. He didn't need to be stronger than the British Empire. He just needed to be more persistent. Gandhi was beaten, imprisoned, and humiliated countless times. He went on hunger strikes that nearly killed him. He walked hundreds of miles in protest, even when his own followers thought it was pointless. He faced ridicule from his enemies, and doubt from his friends. But here's what made Gandhi different. He had learned to persist through principle, not just passion. His persistence wasn't dependent on how he felt on any given day. It was grounded in something deeper, his commitment to truth and justice. And you know what happened? This one man, through the power of persistent action, aligned with unshakable principles, brought the British Empire to its knees. He proved that persistence, when it's rooted in the right foundation, can move mountains. Let me share with you what I learned from Gandhi's example. There are two kinds of persistence: desperate persistence and deliberate persistence. Desperate persistence is what most people practice. They persist because they're afraid of what might happen if they quit. They're driven by fear, desperation, or stubbornness. This kind of persistence might get you results, but it will exhaust you in the process. Deliberate persistence is different. It's persistence with purpose. It's based on a clear vision of what you want to achieve and why it matters. It's powered not by desperation, but by dedication to something greater than yourself. Gandhi's persistence was deliberate. He wasn't just fighting against British rule. He was fighting for a vision of India that was free, unified, and just. That vision gave him the strength to persist when everything seemed hopeless. What vision is driving your persistence? What cause bigger than yourself are you committed to? Because let me tell you something, if your persistence is only about what you can get, you'll quit when the getting gets tough. But if your persistence is about what you can give, what you can contribute, what you can become, then nothing can stop you. I want to tell you about another leader who understood this principle. A man who faced obstacles that would have crushed most people before they even began. His name was Frederick Douglass, and he was born into slavery in America. Now think about that for a moment. Douglass was born into a system designed to keep him powerless, uneducated, and hopeless. The deck was stacked against him in every possible way. Most people in his situation would have accepted their fate. But Douglass had a vision that was bigger than his circumstances. He believed that every human being deserved freedom and dignity, and he was willing to persist in that belief no matter what the cost. When Douglass was just a boy, he made a discovery that changed his life forever. He learned that his master's wife was teaching him to read. When his master found out, he was furious. He told his wife, "If you teach a slave to read, he'll become unfit for slavery." That's when young Frederick realized something powerful. Education was the path to freedom. But here's the thing, once his master forbade his wife from teaching him, Douglass had to find other ways to learn. He could have given up right there. Most people would have. But Douglass persisted. He traded bread with poor white children in exchange for reading lessons. Bread he studied, discarded newspapers and books. He practiced writing in the dirt with sticks. Bread, every spare moment was devoted to learning. Years later, Douglass escaped slavery and became one of the most powerful speakers and writers in American history. He traveled the world, spoke to packed audiences, and wrote books that changed hearts and minds. He proved that no system, no matter how oppressive, can imprison a persistent human spirit. But here's what I want you to understand about Douglass. His persistence wasn't just about escaping his own circumstances. He could have fled to safety and lived quietly. Instead, he chose to persist in fighting for the freedom of all enslaved people. He risked his own safety again and again to speak out against slavery. That's the power of persistence rooted in purpose. When your persistence is about something bigger than yourself, you tap into a source of strength that seems almost limitless. Now let me ask you something. What were you persisting toward? And more importantly, why are you persisting? Because the why makes all the difference in the world. If you're persisting just to prove something to others, you'll quit when the validation doesn't come. If you're persisting just to make money, you'll quit when the money doesn't flow. If you're persisting just to avoid failure, you'll quit when success seems impossible. But if you're persisting because you have a vision of who you can become and what you can contribute to the world, then you'll keep going no matter what. Because every step forward, even the small ones, is moving you closer to that vision. Let me tell you about a woman who understood this better than almost anyone. Her name was Helen Keller, and she faced challenges that most of us can't even imagine. When Helen was just 19 months old, she lost both her sight and her hearing due to illness. Imagine that, cut off from the world of sight and sound, before she could even form clear memories of them. Most people in her situation would have lived in silent isolation forever, but Helen had something that her disabilities couldn't touch. An unquenchable desire to learn and connect with the world around her. And she had the persistence to pursue that desire despite seemingly impossible obstacles. When Anne Sullivan became Helen's teacher, the first thing she had to do was find a way to communicate with a child who couldn't see or hear. It took weeks of patient, persistent effort before Helen understood that the finger movements Sullivan was making in her palm were actually words. But once Helen grasped that concept, her persistence exploded into action. She wanted to learn everything: how to read, how to write, how to speak. She persisted through years of frustration, failure, and exhaustion. She learned to communicate not just through sign language, but through speaking aloud, even though she couldn't hear her own voice. Helen went on to graduate from Radcliffe College with honors. She became an author, a political activist, and an inspiration to millions. She proved that persistence can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable. But here's what I find most remarkable about Helen Keller's story. She didn't just persist for herself. She used her achievements to help others facing similar challenges. She devoted her life to advocating for people with disabilities, for women's rights, and for social justice. That's the mark of true persistence. It doesn't stop at personal achievement. It continues on to make a difference in the lives of others. You know, I've been thinking about what separates the people who achieve their dreams from those who don't. And after years of studying successful people, I've come to realize it's not talent, it's not luck, and it's not even opportunity. It's something much simpler and much more powerful. It's the willingness to persist when persistence seems pointless. Let me tell you about a man who knew this truth better than most. His name was Walt Disney, and today his name is synonymous with magic and wonder. But Walt's journey to success was anything but magical. When Walt was a young man, he was fired from a newspaper job because his editor said he lacked imagination and had no good ideas. Can you imagine that? Walt Disney, the man who created Mickey Mouse and built Disneyland, was told he had no imagination. But that was just the beginning of Walt's challenges. His first animation company went bankrupt. He was turned down by hundreds of investors who thought his ideas were silly. When he pitched the concept for Mickey Mouse, he was told that a cartoon about a mouse would never work because women were afraid of mice. Even after Mickey Mouse became successful, Walt faced constant obstacles. When he wanted to make the first full-length animated movie, everyone in Hollywood told him it was impossible. They called it Disney's folly. They said audiences would never sit through a 90-minute cartoon. But Walt persisted. He spent years developing Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, often working 18-hour days. He mortgaged his house, borrowed money from anyone who would lend it, and pushed his small team to their limits. When Snow White was finally released, it became the highest-grossing film of its time. Walt had proven that persistence could turn impossible dreams into reality. But here's what I find most interesting about Walt's story. He never stopped dreaming bigger dreams. After Snow White, he could have played it safe, made more animated movies, and lived comfortably. Instead, he dreamed of something that had never been done before: a theme park where families could experience magic together. When Walt announced his plans for Disneyland, people thought he'd lost his mind. Amusement parks in the 1950s were cheap, dirty places. Nobody wanted to invest in Walt's vision of a clean, wholesome family destination. Walt was rejected by bank after bank. He was told his idea would never work. But he persisted. He sold his life insurance policy,
borrowed against his house again, and even sold his vacation home to raise money. Today, Disney theme parks welcome millions of visitors every year. All because one man refused to let other people's lack of vision stop his persistence. What Walt Disney understood is something I want you to remember. Persistence isn't about being stubborn or blind to reality. It's about being committed to your vision, while remaining flexible about your methods. When one approach didn't work, Walt tried another. When one investor said no, he found another. When one idea failed, he learned from it and tried something better. That's intelligent persistence. Staying committed to your destination, while being willing to change your route. Now let me tell you about a leader who faced perhaps the greatest test of persistence in modern history. His name was Nelson Mandela, and his story will show you what's possible when persistence is combined with forgiveness and hope. Mandela was imprisoned for 27 years for fighting against apartheid in South Africa. 27 years. Think about that. Most people can't persist through 27 days of difficulty, let alone 27 years. During those years in prison, Mandela had every reason to become bitter, angry, and hopeless. He was separated from his family, denied basic freedoms, and forced to do hard labor. The government offered to release him several times if he would just give up his fight for equality. It would have been so easy to quit. But Mandela understood something profound about persistence. It's not just about enduring hardship. It's about using that hardship to become stronger. Instead of letting prison break him, he used those years to prepare himself for leadership. He studied, he read, he learned about different philosophies and approaches to leadership. He built relationships with his fellow prisoners, and even with his guards. He never stopped believing that South Africa could become a place where all people were treated equally. When Mandela was finally released in 1990, he could have sought revenge against those who had imprisoned him. Instead, he chose a different path. He worked with his former enemies to create a peaceful transition to democracy. He became South Africa's first black president and led the country with wisdom, compassion, and forgiveness. Mandela once said, "The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall." That's the essence of true persistence. Not the absence of setbacks, but the commitment to keep getting back up. What made Mandela's persistence so powerful wasn't just his ability to endure suffering, but his refusal to let suffering make him small. He used his pain to develop empathy, his isolation to deepen his understanding, and his anger to fuel positive change. That's what I call transformational persistence. Using every obstacle as an opportunity to become more than you were before. Let me share with you what I've learned about the anatomy of persistence. Here are 5 key elements that separate persistent people from quitters. First, persistent people have a clear vision of what they want to achieve. They can see their goals so clearly that temporary setbacks don't blind them to the ultimate destination. Vague goals produce weak persistence, but crystal clear visions generate unstoppable momentum. Second, persistent people understand that obstacles are not roadblocks. They're stepping stones. Every challenge is an opportunity to develop new skills, gain new insights, or discover new resources. They ask not, "Why is this happening to me?" but "What can I learn from this?" Third, persistent people have developed what I call selective hearing. They listen to constructive feedback and ignore destructive criticism. They surround themselves with people who support their vision, while remaining open to advice that can help them improve their approach. Fourth, persistent people have learned to celebrate small wins. They understand that every step forward, no matter how small, is progress worth acknowledging. This keeps their motivation high during the long journey toward their bigger goals. And fifth, persistent people have connected their goals to something bigger than themselves. They're not just persisting for personal gain, they're persisting for their family, their community, their values, or their vision of making the world better.
Let me tell you about someone who embodied all 5 of these elements. A woman named Marie Curie. She was the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, the first person to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields, and the first female professor at the University of Paris. But Marie's path to these achievements was filled with obstacles that would have stopped most people cold. When Marie was growing up in Poland, women were not allowed to attend university. The country was under Russian occupation, and educational opportunities were severely limited. Most young women in her situation would have accepted their fate and found a different path. But Marie had a clear vision. She wanted to pursue scientific research, so she and her sister made a pact. They would take turns working to support each other's education. Marie worked as a governess for years, sending money to support her sister's medical studies in Paris. When it was finally Marie's turn, she moved to Paris with almost no money. She lived in a tiny, unheated room and often survived on bread and tea. She was so poor that she sometimes fainted from hunger during lectures. But Marie persisted. She saw every hardship as a temporary obstacle on the path to her larger goal. She graduated first in her physics degree and second in her mathematics degree. When Marie began her research into radioactivity, she faced new challenges. The scientific community didn't take her seriously because she was a woman. She was denied access to proper laboratory facilities and had to conduct her research in a converted shed. For 4 years, Marie and her husband Pierre processed tons of pitchblende ore by hand, stirring huge vats of boiling ore with iron rods almost as tall as themselves. It was backbreaking, dangerous work. The radioactive materials they were working with were slowly poisoning them, though they didn't know it at the time. But Marie persisted. She believed that somewhere in that ore was a new element that could advance human understanding of the universe. And she was right. She discovered not one but 2 new elements, polonium and radium. Even after winning her first Nobel Prize, Marie faced continued discrimination. When she was widowed and continued her research alone, many people thought she should quit science and focus on raising her children. But Marie understood something that her critics didn't. Her persistence wasn't just about personal achievement. She was persisting for the advancement of science, for future generations of women scientists, and for the betterment of humanity. Her research laid the foundation for modern cancer treatment, advanced our understanding of atomic structure, and opened doors for countless other scientists. All because one woman refused to let obstacles stop her pursuit of knowledge. What Marie Curie's story teaches us is that persistence multiplies over time. Every day you persist, you're not just moving closer to your goal. You're building the strength and skills that will help you persist tomorrow. Think of persistence like compound interest. At first, the returns seem small. You put in effort day after day and the results might be barely noticeable. But as time goes on, those small daily efforts begin to multiply. The skills you develop, the relationships you build, the knowledge you gain, they all compound into something much greater than the sum of their parts. This is what I learned from studying another remarkable leader, a man who changed the course of American history through sheer persistence. His name was Martin Luther King Jr., and his story shows us what happens when persistence is powered by an unshakable belief in justice. King began his fight for civil rights. He was just a young pastor in Montgomery, Alabama. The civil rights movement was fragmented, with different groups pursuing different strategies. Many people had been fighting for equality for decades with little progress to show for it. Dr. King could have looked at this situation and decided it was hopeless. The forces against him were overwhelming. Centuries of entrenched autarchies, powerful political opposition, and even violence from those who wanted to maintain the status quo. But Dr. King had something that his opponents didn't expect. A persistence rooted in moral conviction. He understood that temporary defeats were inevitable, but permanent victory was possible if he never gave up. When Dr. King organized the Montgomery bus boycott, it was supposed to last one day. One day became a week became a month, and a month became 30 days. For more than a year, thousands of African Americans walked to work, carpooled, and found other ways to get around rather than ride segregated buses. During those 81 days, Dr. King was arrested, his house was bombed, and he received hundreds of death threats. There were moments when even his closest supporters wanted to give up. The economic pressure was enormous, the physical danger was real, and progress seemed impossible. King kept the focus on the larger vision. He reminded people that they weren't just fighting for the right to sit anywhere on a bus. They were fighting for the principle that all people deserve dignity and respect. That vision gave them the strength to persist when persistence seemed pointless. And you know what happened? They won. The Supreme Court ruled that segregated buses were unconstitutional. But more importantly, they proved that persistent, nonviolent resistance could create real change. That victory in Montgomery was just the beginning. For the next 13 years, Dr. King led march after march, gave speech after speech, and faced arrest after arrest. He was jailed 29 times for his activism. 29 times. Each time he was arrested, Dr. King could have decided he'd done enough. Each time he faced violence, he could have chosen to retreat. Each time his family was threatened, he could have put their safety above the movement. But Dr. King understood something that every persistent person must understand. The moment you quit is the moment you guarantee failure. As long as you keep going, success remains possible. Dr. King's persistence culminated in the March on Washington in 1963, where he delivered his famous "I Have a Dream" speech to over 50,000 people. That speech helped galvanize support for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But here's what I want you to understand about Dr. King's persistence. It wasn't just about achieving legislative victories. It was about changing hearts and minds. It was about proving that love is stronger than hate, that nonviolence is more powerful than violence, and that persistence in the face of injustice can transform a nation. King once said, "If you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward." That's the spirit of persistence, always finding a way to make progress, even when the way forward isn't clear. Now let me share with you something I've observed about persistent people. They all have what I call a next step mentality. They don't get overwhelmed by the size of their goals because they focus on the next step they can take right now. When Walt Disney was building Disneyland, he didn't try to construct the entire park in his mind at once. He focused on the next decision, the next problem to solve, the next piece of the puzzle. King was leading the civil rights movement. He didn't try to change all of American society overnight. He focused on the next march, the next speech, the next opportunity to make progress. This is crucial because most people quit not because their goals are impossible, but because they feel overwhelmed by everything they think they need to do. They look at the mountain they want to climb and see only how high it is, not the path that leads to the top. But persistent people have learned to break down enormous challenges into manageable steps. They understand that you don't have to see the whole staircase to take the first step. Let me tell you about a leader who mastered this approach. A man who literally reached the top of the world through persistent step-by-step progress. His name was Sir Edmund Hillary, and he was the first person to successfully climb Mount Everest. When Hillary first attempted to climb Everest, he failed. The mountain defeated him, as it had defeated every other climber who had tried before him. Hillary could have accepted that defeat and moved on to other challenges. But Hillary understood that failure is just feedback. He studied what went wrong on his first attempt. He learned from other climbers who had failed. He improved his equipment, refined his strategy, and strengthened his physical conditioning. Most importantly, Hillary didn't try to conquer Everest all at once. He broke the climb down into a series of smaller challenges, reaching base camp, establishing higher camps, acclimatizing to the altitude, waiting for the right weather conditions. Each step was difficult, but each step was achievable, and each successful step built his confidence and capability for the next step. On May 29, 1953, Hillary and his climbing partner Tenzing Norgay became the first people to reach the summit of Mount Everest. They stood on top of the world because they had persisted through thousands of smaller challenges. But here's what made Hillary's achievement even more remarkable. He didn't stop there. He spent the rest of his life using his fame and resources to help the people of Nepal. He built schools, hospitals, and bridges in the remote mountain communities where he had found success. That's the mark of true persistence. It doesn't end with personal achievement. It continues into service and contribution to others. Hillary once said, "It is not the mountain we conquer but ourselves." Every time you persist through difficulty, you're not just moving closer to your external goals. You're conquering the internal obstacles that have held you back. Fear, doubt, discouragement, the temptation to quit. These are the real enemies of achievement. When you develop the habit of persistence, you're developing the strength to overcome these internal barriers
And here's something beautiful about persistence. It's contagious. When other people see you refusing to quit, it gives them permission to keep going too. Your persistence becomes an inspiration that ripples out beyond your own life. I've seen this happen again and again. One person's refusal to give up sparks hope in someone else. That person's persistence inspires another person, and another. Before you know it, movements are born, communities are transformed, and the world becomes a little bit better. That's the ultimate power of persistence. It doesn't just change your life, it changes the lives of everyone around you. It proves that ordinary people can achieve extraordinary things when they refuse to accept defeat. Now let me ask you a question that might make you uncomfortable. What would your life look like if you had persisted through every challenge you've ever faced? What dreams would you have achieved? What goals would you have reached? What person would you have become? I'm not asking this to make you feel bad about past decisions. I'm asking because I want you to understand something powerful. It's never too late to start persisting. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. Let me tell you about a woman who understood this truth better than most. Her name was Laura Ingalls Wilder, and she didn't publish her first Little House book until she was 64 years old. 64. Most people that age are thinking about slowing down, not starting new careers. But Laura had a story to tell. The story of her childhood on the American frontier. For years she had shared these stories with her daughter, who encouraged her to write them down. Laura could have said, "I'm too old to become a writer. Nobody will be interested in stories about the old days." Instead, she persisted. She worked on her writing, learned the craft, and submitted her manuscripts to publishers. Her first book, Little House in the Big Woods, was published when she was 65. It became an instant success. Laura went on to write 8 more books in the Little House series. These books have sold millions of copies, inspired a beloved television series, and introduced generations of children to American history, all because one woman decided it was never too late to pursue her dreams. Laura's story teaches us something important about persistence. It's not about age, it's about attitude. It's not about how much time you have left. It's about how you choose to use the time you have. But let me be honest with you about something. Persistence isn't always easy. There will be days when you want to quit. There will be moments when giving up seems like the smart thing to do. There will be times when everyone around you thinks you should stop. During those moments, you need to remember why you started. You need to reconnect with the vision that inspired you to begin this journey. You need to remind yourself that every great achievement in history came through persistence in the face of doubt. Let me tell you about a man who faced more doubt than almost anyone in history. His name was Galileo Galilei, and he dared to suggest that the earth revolved around the sun, not the other way around. Now this might not seem like a big deal to us today, but in Galileo's time, this idea was considered heresy. The church taught that the earth was the center of the universe, and questioning this teaching could result in imprisonment or even death. When Galileo first proposed his theory, he was ridiculed by other scientists, condemned by religious authorities, and threatened with severe punishment. He could have backed down, apologized, and lived a quiet life teaching accepted theories. But Galileo had seen the truth through his telescope. He had observed the moons of Jupiter, the phases of Venus, and the craters of the moon. He knew that the evidence supported his theory, even if no one else was ready to accept it. So Galileo persisted. He continued his observations, refined his theories, and carefully documented his findings. He knew that truth has a way of emerging, even when it's suppressed for a time. Eventually, the church forced Galileo to publicly recant his theories. Under threat of torture, he agreed to say that the earth was stationary, and the sun revolved around it. But legend says that as he left the courtroom, he whispered, "And yet it moved." Galileo understood something that every persistent person must understand. You can be forced to stop speaking the truth, but you cannot be forced to stop believing it. Truth, backed by persistence, will eventually prevail. Today we know that Galileo was right. His persistence in the face of overwhelming opposition helped lay the foundation for modern science. He proved that one person, armed with truth and persistence, can change how the entire world thinks. But here's what I want you to understand about Galileo's story. His persistence wasn't just about being right. It was about his commitment to seeking truth, regardless of the consequences. He persisted because he believed that understanding the universe was more important than personal comfort or safety. That's the kind of persistence that changes the world. Persistence that's rooted in something bigger than personal gain. Now let me share with you what I call the 4 stages of persistence, because understanding these stages can help you navigate your own journey. The first stage is enthusiastic persistence. This is where most people start. You're excited about your goal, energized by the possibilities, and ready to take on the world. This stage feels great, but it doesn't last long. When the initial excitement wears off and the real work begins, many people quit. The second stage is determined persistence. This is where you keep going even though the enthusiasm has faded. You're not as excited as you were at the beginning, but you're still committed to your goal. You push through obstacles and setbacks because you remember why you started. This stage separates dreamers from achievers. The third stage is disciplined persistence. This is where persistence becomes a habit, rather than a feeling. You don't rely on motivation or excitement to keep going. You persist because that's what you do. You've developed systems and routines that carry you forward, even when you don't feel like it. This is where real progress happens. The fourth stage is philosophical persistence. This is the highest level, where persistence becomes part of your identity. You persist not just to achieve specific goals, but because you understand that persistence itself is shaping you into the person you're meant to become. At this stage, setbacks don't discourage you. They strengthen your resolve. Let me tell you about someone who reached this fourth stage. A man who persisted through 20 years of rejection before achieving his dream. His name was Stephen King, and today he's one of the most successful authors in the world. But Stephen's journey to success was anything but easy. His first novel, Carrie, was rejected by 30 publishers. 30? Most people would have given up after 5 or 10 rejections. But Stephen kept sending it out. Even after Carrie was finally accepted, Stephen faced continued rejection. Publishers told him his stories were too scary, too weird, too different from what people wanted to read. For years he worked as a teacher during the day, and wrote at night, often in a cramped laundry room because that was the only quiet space in his house. Stephen could have quit at any point. He could have said, maybe I'm just not meant to be a writer. But he had developed philosophical persistence. He didn't write just to get published. He wrote because writing was part of who he was. Today, Stephen King has published over 60 novels and sold more than 350 million books worldwide. His persistence didn't just make him successful, it enriched the lives of millions of readers around the world. But here's what I find most inspiring about Stephen's story. Even now, after all his success, he still writes every single day. He still faces the blank page, with the same discipline and persistence that carried him through those early years of rejection. That's what true persistence looks like. It doesn't stop when you achieve your goals. It becomes a way of life. Now I want to address something that might be holding you back from developing this kind of persistence. Maybe you're thinking these stories are inspiring, but these were exceptional people. I'm just ordinary. I don't have what it takes to persist like they did. Let me tell you something, every one of these people was ordinary until they decided to persist. Edison was just a curious kid who asked too many questions. Lincoln was just a poor farm boy who liked to read. Gandhi was just a shy lawyer who struggled to find his voice. What made them extraordinary wasn't some special talent they were born with. It was their decision to keep going when ordinary people would have quit. You have that same power. You have the same ability to choose persistence over surrender, progress over comfort, growth over stagnation. The question isn't whether you're capable of persistence. The question is whether you're willing to develop. Let me share with you a story that proves this point. It's about a man named Ray Kroc, who didn't start McDonald's until he was 52 years old. Before that, he was a traveling salesman selling milkshake machines. Ray had been in sales for decades with modest success. He could have settled into a comfortable routine, made a decent living, and retired quietly. But when he discovered a small hamburger restaurant run by the McDonald brothers in California, he saw something bigger. The McDonald brothers had developed a system for making hamburgers quickly and consistently. Ray saw the potential to expand this concept nationwide. But when he proposed franchising their system, the brothers weren't interested in growing beyond their single location. Most people would have given up at that point. The brothers weren't interested. Ray was already in his 50s, and the restaurant business was notoriously difficult. But Ray persisted. He convinced the brothers to let him franchise their system. He invested his life savings, mortgaged his house, and worked 18-hour days to build the McDonald's franchise system. He faced constant financial pressure, skeptical investors, and operational challenges. For years, Ray barely made enough money to pay his bills. He could have quit dozens of times and gone back to selling milkshake machines. But he had a vision of McDonald's restaurants across America, and he refused to let that vision die. Today, McDonald's is one of the most successful restaurant chains in the world, serving millions of customers every day. All because one 52-year-old salesman decided to persist in pursuit of a dream that seemed impossible to everyone else. Ray Kroc once said, "Nothing in this world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent." That's the truth about achievement. It's not about being the smartest or the most talented. It's about being the most persistent. So let me ask you again, what would your life look like if you decided, right now, to persist through every challenge you face? What dreams would you pursue if you knew that persistence could overcome any obstacle? The time for excuses is over. The time for persistence is now. Your future self is waiting to see what you're capable of when you refuse to quit.